Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. BC is forecasting another record budget deficit, nearly $9 billion, up from $1 billion just a few months ago. Up by $1 billion from a few months ago. We'll talk to the Finance Minister Katrine Conroy and take your reaction to the province's finances, what it means for services, and for the election. In half an hour, the high cost of groceries means more people are relying on food banks and nonprofits. Is that sustainable? And we'll hear a call for a provincial food security plan. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Well, just weeks away from the official start to the provincial election campaign, this week BC released its budget forecast with a record $8.9 billion deficit and a rising debt of more than $129 billion. We're asking you for your reaction to BC's finances. You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone, or you can email us at bctoday@cbc.ca. And let us know as well how you think that will figure into the upcoming election. And joining me now is Finance Minister Katrine Conroy. Minister, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Michelle.
Thanks so much for joining us. So the deficit was projected to be $7.9 billion when it was tabled in February. What's behind the jump this week?
Well, there's a few things behind the jump, Michelle. One of the most significant is the cost of fighting the wildfires in this province. That has escalated. It looks like we'll be paying over $886 million this year, which is, we have contingencies for that, but it's something that we have to spend, and we know that it's important to spend that money. But so that has added to it. Also, we've had some decreases in revenues, primarily with the resource industries revenues. So that has also taken a bit of a bite.
Yes, and given that the decreasing revenue side, you knew that BC's economy would be slowing, after the record surplus from before. That was because of high income tax rates, revenue. Why continue with increasing expenditures knowing that the economy was going to be slowing down?
Well, we knew we had a slower a global economy, high interest rates, that's all been adding to it. But at the same time, we had to look at, do we continue to provide services to people in this province, or do we make cuts? And some people are saying that we should have made cuts, but we recognize that it would actually hurt the economy more if we make cuts to services or if we increase fees. There are some challenges head on that we need to take in this province to keep people secure and make sure people can build good lives here, which is what people want to do in BC. And so we made sure that we continue to provide the services that people in this province need.
And what about the increase in capital spending? Vaughn Palmer wrote about this in his column today, and he pointed to this being February. It was seen as an election budget, and there were 3 dozen new capital projects added to the already hefty list of spending. Besides not cutting services, why continue with expensive capital projects?
Well, I think it's important to recognize, Michelle, that we inherited a deficit of infrastructure when we became government in 2017, and we have been continually building to make sure that we can build the schools, the hospitals, the housing that people in this province need. And we also have had a significant increase in our population, so we have to make sure that we have things like schools and hospitals and even highways. Anybody who's traveled on Highway 1 knows that we need to make that investment. And I wish that the previous government had actually invested in things like the hospital in Surrey, for instance. Instead of building that hospital, they sold the land. And so we've had to get land. We've had to start building that hospital because we know that people in Surrey need that. And there's a number of examples of that, but we know that our communities are growing and they need those schools, they need those hospitals. And so we're going to continue to make sure that we can build that.
Is there any cuts that are going to be needed, though, because of the level of the deficit? It is going to be slowing down in the years subsequent. But do you expect that the government, if the NDP is in government, would have to make some cuts?
Well, Right now our economy is stable. We are looking at increases to revenues in the next year. We actually are looking at $1 billion surplus in the next year, as opposed to adding to the against the debt, so which is a good thing. And we know that we have to continue to support people in this province. So we will continue. I think you just have to look at what we've done since 2017 to support people in this province, and we will continue to do that.
Let me just put out our phone numbers if you're listening to this interview. Right now, I'm speaking with BC's Finance Minister Katrine Conroy, and the Finance Minister of the province has posted a forecast of a deficit of $8.9 billion, up by about $1 billion from forecast earlier this year. And given that, what are your thoughts on BC's finances, and what are your thoughts about how this will fit into the upcoming election? Do you see cuts to services? Would you rather no cuts to services in order to maintain this level of spending, or would you rather see cuts? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And Minister, yesterday a group of business groups and advocacy groups, including the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, were calling on each of the political parties to release province-wide economic improvement plans, and they are concerned about the kinds of deficits and debt that BC is facing. What can you say to them to give them some assurance that the economy will improve, to encourage more businesses in BC?
Well, we always welcome feedback from the business community, and we know that, across Canada and actually around the world, there are still economic challenges, but, BC remains strong, our economy is stable, and we're actually going to keep attracting investment and creating good well-paying jobs for people so that they can build a good life here. But I think it's important to recognize that, we have listened to businesses when they've raised issues with us. In this last budget, we doubled the exemption threshold for the employer health tax. So now 90% of the businesses don't pay any of the employer health tax in the province, because we heard that businesses were struggling, and so that's how we could help them. We've also, kept electricity rates low and given an average of $400 in savings to small business with the BC electricity affordability credit. Actually, and our small business taxes are 25% lower than when Mr. Rustad was in government. And I think that's important to remind people that, the business taxes are lower. We're also providing restaurants, bars, and pubs with access to wholesale liquor prices. And that's saved over $264 million so far since we initiated that, because we're listening to people, we're listening to businesses and wanting to work with them, because we know how important businesses are. One of the other things that I definitely notice when I talk to businesses is they say that, they need housing for their workers. So our housing initiatives, which were started when our premier was the minister responsible, are creating housing for people right across the province. And I think you just had an announcement on your news, but it's really important that we get that housing for them. And then, of course, childcare. They also said that, they wanted, that people wanted to come back to work, but, they couldn't because of childcare issues. And we've been increasing the childcare, and we're just expanding the $10 a day again, which has made a significant difference in people's lives. And in the last year, 75% of the women or people that returned to the workforce in this province were women, and they directly attributed it to the affordable childcare. So that has also helped small businesses. But we understand that, times can be tough and are tough for some businesses. We want to make sure we can support them.
What do you say then? And those are expenditures that people have been calling for, right? More schools. Mm-hmm. But the criticism that the NDP has always faced historically has been that they are not good financial managers when it comes to managing the province's finances. Does this just feed into that criticism heading into an election?
Well, actually, BC's economy is one of the strongest in the country right now. And since 2017, we've had the fastest growing economy of any major province in the country. And we're actually seeing the strongest private sector job growth. We actually had 9,800 new private sector jobs created in just this last month alone. We have the highest wage growth amongst provinces and also one of the lowest unemployment rates. So I know that people want to say that the NDP...
Oh, Minister? Our line is cut off, unfortunately, with Minister Katrine Conroy. Let's go to a call now. Let me put out the phone numbers once again, asking you for your thoughts, your reaction to what you heard from the Finance Minister there. You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Your thoughts on an $8.9 billion deficit being forecast for this budget. And it's a record deficit, and asking you what your thoughts are on the province's finances and how this factors into the upcoming election. And Jessica is on the line now in Victoria. Hi, Jessica.
Hi.
Thanks so much for calling in. What do you make of what you've heard?
Well, we have to raise taxes to the rich. We have to. And that's including me. I'm pretty privileged, so I'd be paid more. And we need to raise taxes on big business, especially international business, not small businesses, which are the driver of our economy, really. And it's become a taboo. For the last 40 years, people have been brainwashed into hating taxes. And the thing about it is, the BC Liberals cut taxes to the extremely wealthy when they came in the early 2000s, and then realized what they'd done to themselves, and they sold schools and hospitals and courthouses and seniors' health care, and they made a mess of our infrastructure. And at a certain point, somebody has to pay up. And they keep on talking about handing debt down to the next generation. But honestly, that can be a debt, or it can be the society falling apart. And we know that the countries with the strongest, most stable economies in the long term are the countries with the strongest, most stable public health care and public education. So if you want to retain your wealth, if you're extremely wealthy, you need a stable society. And that's the job of government, to build in those stabilizers. We need to do that.
It's interesting that you raised that, Jessica, and do you see a kind of a growing debate over, smaller government and lower taxes against, yes, government providing more services, as you've just been saying, given the rise that we're seeing in, support for conservative governments here in BC and federally that seem to be promising more of that and garnering some support?
Well, the Conservatives always campaign by generating outrage and despair. That's how they do it. They tell you Canada is broken. They tell you it's a big fat mess. And they tell you not to trust government because big business and the most wealthy people in this country are their big donors. But it's nothing to be proud of.
Okay, so you see that as not the way to go in the future.
Well, I think it's corrupt, and I think fear-mongering is the cheapest way to campaign. And that's how they get these people to vote for them. They also teach them to hate visible minorities. Like, there's a formula, and Trump does it, and Boris Johnson did it, and Pierre Poilievre does it, and Le Pen does it. They trump up all this fear and hatred and mistrust, and then they get huge donations so they can win campaigns. And it's just
Jessica,
cheap.
Thank you very much for the call. That's Jessica in Victoria. Peter is calling us now from Duncan, and I think we are reconnecting with the minister. So we'll see if that is possible to reconnect with Finance Minister Katrine Conroy. But right now, Peter is on the line in Duncan. Hi, Peter. What do you want to say about the finances here in BC?
Well, hi. I think a lot of the problem with the deficit is because of increasing costs. We look at the climate disasters, including fires, floods, road destruction, and so on. I know in the United States, the last data I saw was from Insurance Bureau in the States. They estimated, I think it was 2022 or 2023, an extra $267 billion spent that year on climate disasters. The other thing I can see increasing costs is we've been underfunding medicine for quite some time. I think in 1990 Canada was cutting enrollment in all med schools at the time, despite the doctors telling them, "Look, we're facing a boomer tsunami coming with both the doctors and the population." That has to be caught up, and they have to change the the style of pay to family doctors to make it more of a business proposition. And I see the current government is doing that. We have the highest rate of family practice residents coming from other parts of Canada this year. There's a number of issues on that, but one of the big ones, though, I think, as one of your callers earlier mentioned, is progressive taxation. I think I personally should be paying more taxes. I try and make up with it for that by charitable donations, but we need, and this is something that the right-wing parties are very careful not to do, to increase. I mean, I think it was Brian Mulroney, who I was voting for at the time, actually decreased.
And you're touching on the role of the federal government there as well, right, when it comes to taxes, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, very much so. The federal government. We're not, but provinces can do that as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, Peter, raising the point that costs have increased due to the impacts of climate change. We just heard the minister say part of the increase in the deficit has been because of the cost of fighting wildfires, and talking as well about the doctor shortage. Thank you so much for the call, Peter.
Very welcome. Thanks.
Okay, take care. Our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Let us know what your thoughts are on BC's record budget deficit forecast at $8.9 billion, up about $1 billion from the last forecast earlier this year. What are your thoughts on BC's finances? How do you think it'll affect the upcoming election? And is it important to you, as we heard from our two callers there, to have taxes, to pay for those services that they were talking about? And our last caller was talking about climate change impacts and the medical system as well, the healthcare system. Again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And I think we do have Finance Minister Katrine Conroy back on the line. Hello, Minister.
Hi, Michelle. Technology is great when it works. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Talk about infrastructure. Let us know. I think you were on you were talking about your response to the call from business groups to put forward a plan to improve the economy in BC.
And we're definitely, as I said, we're doing that. And I do actually want to respond. I did hear what Peter said, and he's quite right that climate change has, cost us more as a province, and we have to make sure that we are doing mitigating, like paying for mitigation to make sure that we can, that things like climate change are not going to be as expensive as they have been in the past. And so we are doing that. And I just wanted to also point out that we are building a medical school in Surrey, the first medical school to be built in a long time in BC, because we recognize the need for doctors. And we have done more work with doctors we have over 800 new doctors in our province, because people want those doctors. We also have more nurses, thousands of more nurses. We're told that our public service is too high, but we're bringing back the people that need to do the work that people want done, like teachers, like nurses, like doctors, making sure we have people in government that can get the permits passed, because, the business community is also sad that, permits aren't getting passed fast enough. So we are bringing in that staff that was cut from the ministries. We've been slowly bringing those people back to make sure that work can get done to support business in this province.
At the same time, I'm just looking at a news release here from John Rustad and the Conservatives saying that this expected provincial deficit is a demonstration of a complete lack of fiscal responsibility. I want to ask you, given the expenses that you've just been talking about, at the same time, this February budget of this year, it was seen as a pre-election budget, and you have also over the last year given things like one-time rebates to people. Is that just sort of trying to appease or assuage people who are concerned about their own affordability ahead of an election versus a more diligent fiscal plan?
I think it is a diligent fiscal plan, because it's looking at how we can support people, because that's what people are asking for right now. This is, the time. And I think we should be asking Mr. Rustad, what are you going to cut? What are you going to cut? I want to ask Mr. Millibar, what are you going to cut from services? Like, are you going to do what you did before, cut thousands of jobs from the healthcare? I mean, already Mr. Rustad has come forward with a healthcare plan that is going to see over $4 billion taken out of the health care. So you have to ask, how are we going to do that? What are we going to cut? I mean, are we going to cut the nurses, the doctors? Or are we going to cut more services?
But would you rather debt to be pushed down to future generations?
But we have to remind people in the province that our debt is manageable. We have one of the lowest interest rates in the entire country. We have one of the lower GDP to debt ratios. Our debt is manageable. And what we have to look at is the cost of cutting services to people as opposed to raising taxes. We have to look at what that means to people in this province. And I think people have to ask themselves that. Do we want more services cut? Do we want fewer teachers in the classroom? Do they not want more, like we keep hearing about the need for schools in our province? And we are building those schools. And we're doing a lot of catch-up from what we inherited. And that's what's important. So we got to make sure that we ask those questions.
Okay, and for his part, John Rustad has denied that his plan calls for cuts of $4 billion to healthcare. That was the comment, the response to that allegation or criticism from the NDP. Minister, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you so much, Michelle. Really appreciate it.
You take care.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
That's Katrine Conroy, BC's Finance Minister. It's now 12:26 Pacific Time. Now, staying with politics, it's the final day for federal Liberals to strategize at their caucus retreat in Nanaimo. And Justin Trudeau spoke today. He says he's ready to take on the Conservatives when the fall sitting begins in Ottawa on Monday.
And I can't wait to continue getting into it this fall with Poilievre, whose perspective is cuts are the only way forward, because I know that confident countries invest in their future, invest in their workers, invest in their people, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
Meanwhile, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says his party will put forward a non-confidence motion at the earliest opportunity in an attempt to trigger a federal election. But he says it's up to the NDP to join that effort.
Jagmeet Singh claims that he's torn up the supply and confidence agreement. That means he has to vote non-confidence to trigger a carbon tax election. And I'm asking him to answer the question he has dodged 31 times. Will you vote non-confidence to trigger a carbon tax election at the earliest possible time? Yes or no?
So what does Jagmeet Singh think about that? The NDP leader responded at his party's retreat in Montreal.
I've said on any vote, we're going to look at the vote and we'll make our decision. I'm not going to say our decision ahead of time. We will look at the votes and we'll make a determination on what's in the best interest of Canadians. There will be an election at some point, and that election is going to be a choice between Pierre Poilievre, who wants to cut the things you need, or New Democrats who want to give back people hope.
Lots more on the day's political stories. You can go to the CBC News app or our website, cbcnews.ca. You're with BC Today here on CBC. We're on Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC. You can use the CBC News app as well, or just go to YouTube too. You can just search CBC Vancouver. I'm Michelle Elliott. Very nice to be with you this afternoon. I see a lot of emails coming in on our interview with Finance Minister Katrine Conroy. We'll get to them in a few moments. And in about 5 minutes from now or so, we're going to talk about food security. Yes, of course, high prices at the groceries, they are impacting many families in Metro Vancouver. So we're going to hear from a nonprofit, Quest Nonprofit Groceries, and they are calling for a province-wide food security plan. So we're going to hear from them on that, and we'll ask you, can we continue to rely on nonprofits to fill in the gaps when it comes to food affordability? And what would you like to see when it comes to a plan to tackle food security? That's coming up after this CBC News update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Saanich police are concerned about an increase in impaired drivers on their streets. So far this year, 464 impaired drivers have been pulled off the road, compared with 468 for all of last year. Chief Constable Dean Duthie says they will continue to put their efforts into enforcement of what he calls selfish behavior. The trial of a man accused of killing a teenage passing by a shooting in Vancouver has ended in a mistrial. King Carter was on trial for 2 counts of second-degree murder. The Crown argued he had killed 2 people in January 2018. One was an alleged gangster and the other was a 15-year-old boy who was hit by a stray bullet while in the back seat of his parents' car. Vancouver's police chief says a mistrial was not the outcome he had hoped for, but he's hopeful that in time there will be accountability. And organizations representing family doctors in BC say physicians need paid sick days, vacation coverage, extended health and dental benefits, and a pension plan. The BC College of Family Physicians and BC Family Doctors published a series of requests for whoever forms the next government after this October's provincial election. And now the forecast on the North Coast, mainly sunny this afternoon with a high of 16, highs up to 18 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, mainly cloudy with a high of 18 as well. Highs from 15 to 23 with a chance of showers and thunderstorms in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a chance of showers and thunderstorms as well with a high of 20. And mainly cloudy this afternoon in Greater Victoria, a chance of showers in Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley with highs around 18. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Rob.
You're welcome.
That's Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. This is BC Today, and a lot more on the day's top stories on the afternoon shows coming up this afternoon in your region and Metro Vancouver. And here's what you can expect on the Coast.
Michelle, hi there. It's Gloria Makarenko here, inviting you to join us this afternoon for On the Coast. We'll have much more reaction to the U.S. presidential debate on this afternoon show. And we'll also focus in on the BC election, specifically on the high number of independent candidates expected to run now that BC United suspended its campaign. And one of BC's most successful independent MLAs, Vicky Huntington, who represented Delta South for 2 terms, she will be our guest to talk about the role that independents can play in the legislature. So join us for On the Coast between 3 and 6 this afternoon.
Gloria, thank you very much. That's Gloria Makarenko. You can hear her on the Coast on CBC Radio 1 in Metro Vancouver and anywhere just by using the CBC Listen app. We're going to continue with our discussion from our last half hour. Again, BC is forecasting a record budget deficit and a rising debt of more than $129 billion. The forecast deficit is $8.9 billion, and this just a few weeks before the start of a provincial election campaign. And of course, affordability, economic stability, both expected to be big issues in this election. Let's take some calls now. Paul has been waiting in Vancouver. What are your thoughts? What did you think of what you heard from the minister, Paul?
Well, I think Canadians should know we got to pay more taxes. Why, your wages went up? Why does our taxes go up?
Okay, so you're saying our taxes should go up along with wages? Well,
governments have to spend more money.
Okay.
I'm a multi-generation Canadian you're talking to here. My oldest son's actually 20 generation now. He is. Well, his roots come out of Quebec, and I'm telling people tax is not a dirty word. No. The right wing makes it a dirty word. Why? Because they're trying to get reelected again. And when they get reelected, Canadians are in more trouble. Why? Because they want to say they're going to tell you things they're not even going to do for anybody.
Okay.
They're just out for their own interests.
So
I tell Canadians, it's time we pay more taxes. I have free time in life. Why? It's 7 years ago since I've left my job now, and I love my, I don't call it retirement, I call it a new life. Great, and I get to talk to people now.
Paul,
Most
I
people are doing
appreciate
well in this country.
you're appreciating what you have paid towards.
And 7 years ago, I was in Newfoundland, for God's sake.
Yeah.
I say the greatest Canadians in this country are in that end of the country. Why? Because I had some trouble while I was there.
Okay.
I took an old motorcycle across the country.
Paul, thank you so much, and that's going to stick with me. Taxes is not a dirty word. So that was Paul's point there, saying that's what you're going to need in order to fund services. Thank you so much for the call. Joseph is on the line now in White Rock. Hi, Joseph.
Hi. I respectfully disagree with Paul. But anyway.
Okay. Tell me
listen,
why.
I used to be in a role where I literally had an expense budget and the responsibility for $100 million plus. And it was a company that was growing, and I was with it a long time. So at first it was not quite that high. And then after a while, you start looking at these balance sheets and you start going, I must have made a mistake. There's too many zeros. There's too much. It's hard to get used to working with numbers that big. And I listened to the minister and the politicos and journalists like yourself talk about these numbers, the billion here and multi billions there, and it's said in such a laissez-faire way, and it's like, does anybody really understand? Like, really think about, like, sit at home today, all your listeners, and think about how much $1 billion is. It's an incredible amount of money. And I mean, the tricky part is, like, in my experience, 100 million. I mean, you to do that job right, you can't just ignore $20,000 expenses, 50,000, even though it seems like a little bit of money compared to that huge amount. And my fear is with provincial and especially the federal government in public service is I don't think anybody really looks at the micro because they're so busy looking at a macro number. I don't think anybody really is focusing, and that's my concern. That's all I have to say. I'm concerned that because the numbers are so onerous, I worry that people don't take the time, especially people like the minister. Do they ever really take a time to sit in a room with the actual frontline people who are putting together these balance sheets or whatever she's looking at, and look at some of these lines and ask the question?
Joseph, thank you very much. Glad you got to call us as well from White Rock.
Thanks.
That's Joseph calling us from White Rock. An email now here from Andrew, who writes, my question is always the same. Whenever they talk about cutting costs, they immediately jump to cutting services. Look to private industry. Cutting costs can be done without cutting services. Why do they not cut costs? By cutting unnecessary meetings, travel, staffing, office costs, or poor planning, etc. And Joanne wrote us as well. I'm in the process of writing to the federal minister on why people who save and put money aside to improve their lives, but any interest they earned on already taxed income, the CRA includes interest as part of their net income. If you've been diligent to prepare for your golden years, it feels like you're in a race to the bottom. Joanne, thank you very much for that as well. bctoday@cbc.ca is our email address. It is 12:38 now, Pacific time. I'm Michelle Elliott. Very nice to have you with us. And right now we're going to talk about a call for a plan to tackle food insecurity. Right? There's the cost of living as well as an issue for voters coming into this election. And this call is coming from a nonprofit in Metro Vancouver. Quest Nonprofit Grocery Market says food prices and the rising cost of groceries remain a major issue for its 10,000 clients. And with that election coming up, the organization is calling for a provincial strategy on food security. So we're taking your calls on that. Can we continue to rely on food banks and nonprofits to fill in the gaps on food unaffordability? And what needs to be in a food security strategy that will be sustainable for BC? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone or email bctoday@cbc.ca. Theo Lamb is Executive Director of Quest Nonprofit Grocery Markets and joins me now. Good afternoon.
Hi, Michelle.
Thanks so much for being here. Can you describe the challenges that are faced by your clients?
Yeah, so Quest operates 5 nonprofit grocery markets across Metro Vancouver. And as you noted, we serve over 10,000 unique individuals who are referred to us. We partner with over 600 different organizations and nonprofits who operate and act as our referring partners. So they're the folks who are in a position to identify an individual who may be facing economic barriers and having trouble affording their groceries every week. And then they're referred to Quest. You have a client membership, which is active for 3 years. And this year, we decided we wanted to talk to our clients about what kind of food they wanted, they needed, they could find with us, but also they were having trouble affording day to day, and what other barriers they were facing in addition to the rising cost of groceries. And we've put up together this report and shared with you what we think are the most important points that our client community shared with us.
Yeah, what did you hear from them?
Well, we knew going in that the rising cost of groceries was an issue. We have conversations every day with folks in our markets who are grateful to find what they do in our markets, but are still struggling to make ends meet and finish off that, that shopping list they come in with every day. They also told us that, the cost of living in BC was number one. 96% of our clients who we surveyed said that. 93% identified the cost of housing, barriers to employment, access to social assistance. They also identified the stigma associated of asking for help in the first place. And what this tells us is that, okay, the average household of 4 with an income of $40,000 a year, that is by provincial definition, the poverty line, is going to expect to spend upwards of 40% of that total household income on groceries and food alone. So you think about that, and then you think about that list of barriers they just named. That doesn't leave a lot for the cost of housing, rent, utilities. You got to keep folks warm. You're thinking about your schooling, all of the extra needs in addition to the cost of food. There's just not enough left over at the end of the week or the end of the month. And food is what gets sacrificed. Now, in your and my mind, we know that we need to go grocery shopping all the time to just keep going. But decisions become more and more arbitrary and reactive if you have less and less to spend on the groceries themselves. And so we're really thinking the cost of groceries right now and access to affordable food has got to be the number one issue on everybody's minds because we all feel it.
And so you're calling for a province-wide food security strategy. What would that entail?
Yeah, there's a few things we can look at both municipal and a provincial level. The provincial level, we believe that ministries like the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Poverty Reduction need to be at the table here. Doesn't make sense if the folks who are responsible for developing the policy that are going to support people facing economic barriers aren't talking to the people who are supporting our business leaders, our farmers, our actual food producers, the people who are working the land. These two have to come together. There's got to be targets and goals and action items that emerge. And most importantly, there has to be budget put towards a very specific category of food security.
Okay, a separate line item. I'm going to come back to you on that. We were just speaking with the Finance Minister, in fact, on a record deficit in BC. And that tension between the need for services and the impact on the fiscal standing of the provincial government as well. So I'll ask you a little bit about more about that. And let's just take a call here right now. We're asking you as well, can we continue to rely on nonprofits and food banks to fill in the gap when it comes to food affordability? And what do you think needs to be included when it comes to a food security strategy? We're taking your ideas right now. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. B is on the line in Surrey. Hi, B. What did you want to say about food security?
Oh, hi. Good afternoon. Well, I have one suggestion. It's not total security, but it's noticeable that around here where I live, Surrey Central, there's only one store, Cellphone, which has a food bank box. And although I'm retired and have a small income pension, it's nothing to me to put in a can or two And I'm sure that applies to most people if there is a box.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if it would be possible to make it mandatory that in stores, large food stores, or even small ones with something like 10 or more employees, put out a box so that people can dump something in. I don't know if that would work, but people do give. I've watched them when it's available. In fact, even standing outside mendicants, people will actually go in and buy something for them, like a liter of milk or a loaf of bread.
People can be generous and thank you very much for that idea, making it more accessible and easier to actually donate to the food bank.
Absolutely.
You take care. Thanks so much for the call. That's B in Surrey. Aaron is on the line now at Qualicum Beach. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for chatting with me.
Sure thing. What are your thoughts on food insecurity and what would help?
Yeah, so I'm actually a local farmer. So my partner and I run a farm, and we sell direct to our customers through the farmers market. So my focus for food security is obviously on the production end. And I think that there needs to be just a real shift in mindset of focusing back on agricultural production in the province.
That is really interesting. It's been a tough year for farmers in the Okanagan and elsewhere. What's needed to encourage farmers to stay? I understand it's been hard for farmers to even stay in the business. What's needed for farmers to bring them more support?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a snowball of effects for different farms. We're facing the same cost of living crisis that everybody else in the province is facing. And there are a number of specific things that need to happen. A big one that I continue to advocate for is land access for farmers. So we're not going to have farmers who are going to stay in and build their experience and build their production levels to feeding their communities with more food if they don't have secure land access. And that's something that we struggle with the same as we're seeing the housing prices skyrocketing. There are huge problems with how we treat our ALR land that needs to be protected, but also how we make sure that farmers get onto secure land tenureship or ownership, which is out of reach for the vast majority of new farms who are interested in growing food for their community, but they can't access the land to do that long term.
Wow. And can you tell me why? I know this year it's been hard to find, peaches, the Okanagan peaches at local grocery stores. Why is it so? It seems incongruous to me, right? We live in a province that is so rich in farms and farmland, and yet most of the produce we see in the grocery stores are from California or Washington.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's multiple issues coming together. One of them is that farmers are frontline workers on the climate catastrophe. So the peaches were a direct result of massive swings in weather that decimated fruit. We've also seen the closure of the BC Tree Fruit Co-op really recently, which
that's right.
I think there was a huge opportunity for the government to step in there and make sure that didn't happen. There's hundreds of family farms that rely on that as their source of income, and we're going to see the effects for years to come of that closure just from the catastrophic event of them this year. Having that loss, we're going to see those farms go up for sale. A lot of them are going to turn into vineyards. And it's just a lot of things all at once. The other thing is just that we've allowed monopolies in terms of our grocery chains, and I don't sell through that. That's not realistic for my farm, and that's not the way that I choose to farm. I sell directly to my customers at the Qualicum Beach Farmers Market.
And why isn't it realistic?
Because that's a level of scale that focuses on a type of production that isn't always necessarily the most ecological way to produce food.
Like mass production.
Create security when we're relying on one or two crops for our income. And because, frankly, the grocery stores take every opportunity they can to undermine farmers who bring in crops. They will say, well, I can get that cheaper from Mexico. You have to meet my prices. Grocery profits have not gone down despite the federal government saying that they put in legislation to limit profits. I've heard directly from friends who are saying that every time they try to raise their prices, the grocery store will threaten to cut their contracts. So the problem with that is the profits and the monopoly that we've got in the grocery store system.
Okay. Erin, lots of interesting points there. Thank you so much for the call.
Thanks for having me, Michelle.
You take care. Theo, you talked about, merging the two, the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Poverty Reduction. What do you make of the points that have just been made there when it comes to supporting production and farmers in BC?
There's no food without our farmers. We love our farmers. And what our clients told us in response was the 3 food categories they need and want the most, and that are the furthest out of reach with price increases between 5 and 7% in traditional retail, are animal protein, which you need farmers for, produce, fruits and vegetables, and then, of course, bread, which uses commodities to be made in the first place. This all takes farming and production to make its way to our communities. And it's a cycle, right? When we aren't able to ensure that beautiful food like the type Aaron grows and delivers directly isn't in the hands of all British Columbians, that impacts health outcomes, nutritional outcomes, educational outcomes, family. Like, it's this huge ripple effect, and it all comes back just like a food cycle to where the food is grown. So the Ministry of Agriculture, you bet they have to be at the table. Businesses, absolutely, we need them in conversation. We source 90% of our donations through food businesses to begin with. And then, of course, all of the organizations like Quest who are on the front lines, who know exactly what our clients need and who are asking their clients directly what they need and want to thrive in a grocery store week to week.
Jim is our next caller now in Nanaimo. Hi, Jim. What are your thoughts on food security?
Excuse me?
Yes, what are your thoughts on food security?
Well, when you talk about a provincial plan for food security, I always go back to what I believe is water, food, shelter, and special needs. So every living thing requires that. Water means safe, drinkable water for our people who are our homeless neighbors. Work on that, make sure our communities have it. Also, and then you go after that, the food. Food security is hugely important. If we don't take care of our own food in British Columbia, we're going to be in a problem. We can build greenhouses. We can do a number of things, but it has to be a provincial mandated situation. So I've talked water and food. Now shelter goes along with that. We can water people. We can feed them. But if we don't shelter them properly, opening up the bureaucracy, some different forms of housing, not everybody can afford the 5,000 square foot houses I've designed. So you have to get different forms of housing and a mix of housing in areas. We have to spread those things around. Where we supply the food, where we supply the water, where we supply the housing is a mix in our community.
Okay.
And then special needs comes into it. Different people have different needs. And if we can facilitate people in schools with education and mixing our communities, we'll be far better off. Water, food, shelter, special needs.
Are you an architect, Jim?
No.
Okay, pardon me. I thought you said
old man, ADHD, done a billion things.
Okay, I just heard you say $5 million homes that I designed, so I just thought that perhaps you were someone involved in that.
Designers can do that too. You just have to hire the right engineers and things.
Sure thing. Jim, thank you so much for your call.
Thank you.
The basic needs of a population, right? And so he's saying, yes, that we do need a provincial plan. Scott writes, I wanted to suggest an idea that could help support families across Canada, a citizen dividend funded by a 1% land tax. This approach could generate enough revenue to provide $1,600 per month to each family of 4. And by directly addressing food insecurity, this initiative could help ensure that all families have access to nutritious food. I believe this could be an innovative and impactful way to support communities. Randy writes and gives an example in his own life. The neighbors and I are having fun growing food. It started off as a little competition a few years ago and has evolved to filling balconies. You'd be amazed what you can grow on a balcony. With a property manager's permission, some are talking about taking over the flower beds, and now we're talking about taking over some of the grass. It is easy, fun, and you can't get fresher produce. Sounds like a victory garden. And David writes, I agree with much of what your guest suggested about the need for government and markets to prioritize the links between those in food need with local foods. My students have previously mapped food deserts in places like Surrey, and it's shocking how far people have to walk to access fresh, affordable foods. More farmers markets and supportive policies for buying and producing locally would be good. Why hasn't the current BC government supported the buyout of the recently failed tree fruit cooperative in the Okanagan? This seems like a no-brainer, a locally controlled co-op that should be absolutely supported by the BC government, which in turn supports a local fruit and farmer community. Thank you for all of those emails. Really interesting. I'm going to go back to Scott's email there about a citizen-funded dividend that would be distributed among families. You know, what do you think there? We're talking about affordability and I guess food affordability in that as an issue heading into this provincial election and the federal election as well. At the same time, people can be critical of governments that do spend too much. So how do you make the case that this is something that, as you said, should be a line budget, that food security should be a line in the budget in itself?
So that's a really interesting point that Scott made. What we know here at Quest, and this is critical, is that when we invite our clients who are referred to us to participate in the economic cycle, it's not a handout. We are able to remove a lot of the stigma that's associated with the very much needed and critical food bank model. When we invite our clients in, they can spend their money. They can buy what they want. They can come back when they want. When they have that economic agency, that is what begins to disrupt the cycles of poverty. That is what changes and starts to change all of these barriers, from cost of housing to the cost of living to the rising cost of food. And that's why this conversation has to center resources, capital, and attention at a provincial level on food security as a whole.
Theo Lam, always great to speak with you. This is certainly a very important topic for our audience, and great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Take care.
You too. Theo Lam is Executive Director of Quest Nonprofit Grocery Markets. That is it for our show. Thank you so much to all of our callers who joined us and emailed us as well. Again, our email address is bctoday@cbc.ca. You can listen to the show again. Just use the CBC Listen app, or you can go to our website, cbc.ca/news.